Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Sarah Abosh Jacobson, and I am the Barbara Raymond Chief Education Officer here at the Dallas Holocaust and Human Rights Museum. And I'd like to thank you so much for joining us for our 2025 Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series. Today you will hear from the wonderful Mrs. Hanna Schrob, who will share her story of arrest and deportation to Westerbork Transit Camp, transfer to other camps, and there's considerably more, but I'm not going to steal her thunder. Before we begin, I would like to thank our community partners for the Spring Break Survivor Speaker Series: Dallas Jewish Historical Society, Green Hill School, Jewish Federation of Greater Dallas, League of Women Voters of Dallas, the Legacy Senior Communities, Mental Health America of Greater Dallas, and the Southwest Jewish Congress. We are extremely grateful for your support of the museum because we could not do programs like this without your help. I would also like to extend a special welcome to our museum members and volunteers in the audience. Again, we couldn't fulfill our mission without you and your help. If you are interested in becoming a museum member or a volunteer, please visit our website at dhhrm.org and you can find out more there. In just a moment, Hanna will share her story with you, and then we're going to have time for question and answers. If you are here in person today, you will have received an index card and a golf pencil on your way in. Please, as you're listening to Hanna speak, write down any questions that you may have. Our staff will be around when she's done speaking to collect those questions, and we will get to as many of those as we can. If you are joining us via Zoom, please use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and write those questions in there, and again, we will filter those in as well. I would also kindly ask you to turn off your cell phone ringers. If you're not sure how to do that, turn to the young person to your right or left. They can do it for you. And that'll enable us to hear Hanna's story without any disruptions. Please also refrain from recording her talk today. We are recording it, and it will be available on our YouTube channel within the next several days. So you'll be able to get to a reasonably professional copy of her speech. And it is now my great pleasure to turn things over to Hanna Schrob. Hanna.
Thank you, Sarah. Shalom, everyone, and thank you for allowing me to tell you some of my story. I am one of the lucky ones. My immediate family of 6 survived the war. I was not quite 7 years old when the Gestapo, that's the German police, knocked on our door and removed us from our home. My name is Hanna Laurie Spielman. I was born in Maastricht, Holland on July 5th, 1936. Do your math and you'll know how old I am. My parents were Helen and Alexander Spielman. I had 3 siblings. Bernard was the oldest and was born in Essen, Germany. Nathan, myself, and my sister Edith were born in Maastricht. My mother was born in New York City to German immigrants. When she was 3 years old, her parents decided to return to Europe because they could not adjust to living in America. My father was born in Poland on September 15, 1905. He was an optician and founded the International Optical Syndicate and was quite a successful businessman. My father was on a business trip to Essen, Germany, when he met my mother. At that time, she was working at her brother's factory as a seamstress when she was introduced to my father, and they quickly fell in love. They were married in 1932. A year later, my mother gave birth to her first child, Bernard. This was the same time that Hitler became Chancellor of Germany in 1933, just a year after my parents were married. life became very difficult for Jewish people in Germany. Jewish businesses were closed, banks were closed, children no longer could go to school, and all professionals no longer could practice in their fields. Along with my aunt and uncle, my parents saw the danger and decided to move across the German border to Maastricht. Here, and that's where they believed they would be safe. Here in Maastricht, I and two more siblings were born. Because of the change in American citizenship laws, at that time, Nathan and I were granted American citizenship, and the law was on the American books that stated any child of an American mother is automatically an American citizen. That law only existed for 6 years, so 2 of us were born under that law and 2 of us weren't. Our life in Maastricht was very normal and very happy. My father had a very successful eyeglass import business, and we lived in a beautiful home. In 1940, Hitler conquered Holland. We no longer were allowed to be outdoors without the Jewish star of David patch sewn on our clothing. I think there's a picture up there. That is an original that I have. I don't know why my parents saved it, but it's now mine. We were no longer allowed to have cars, telephones, and children were not allowed to attend schools, and life became very restricted. The only way to continue the education of Jewish children was privately by Jewish teachers. During an air raid, with bombs and sirens in the background, my mother went into labor to give birth to her 4th child. At the hospital, nurses and doctors were frantically getting other patients down to the basement, leaving my mother all alone to deliver her baby girl. As danger continued to loom throughout Europe, my aunts and uncles decided to leave and were able to sail to the United States. Before departing, they tried to convince my parents to leave with them. At that time, my father was a disbeliever and didn't think Hitler would come into Holland. As time went on, things got dramatically worse, so my parents decided then to try to flee Europe in late 1942. My family packed up our belongings into crates and ready to get on a ship destined for America. Unfortunately, it was too late, and the Germans would not allow the ship to leave the port in Holland. During this time, people all over Europe could take great risks to help Jewish people in whatever way they could by offering food, shelter, information, and continuing education for children. However, there were many people who could not be trusted, who would turn in Jews if given the chance because they were afraid and hoped to gain benefits from the Nazis. A generous neighbor offered to store the valuables that our family had crated for the departure. During the night, these crates were transported over the roofs of the houses so that nobody could see what they were doing. In Holland, most of the homes are row houses, and so they brought the crates up on the roof and transported it 3 doors down to these people that offered to take them. Because these neighbors were Gentiles, non-Jews, they had no reason to believe that they could help, but had promised my parents that they could recover their belongings after the war if they survived. If not for their courageous help, we would not have been able to recover any of our valuable possessions. 6 weeks after the birth of my sister Edie, the Nazis knocked on our door and took us away. We found out that the town's mayor had denounced my family to the Germans. Denouncing meant that the Maastricht mayor told the Nazis my family were Jews. Off to a living hell went 2 adults, 3 children, and an infant, and just a few suitcases. We were forced to quickly decide what we should pack in the few suitcases that they allowed: diapers, clothing, and items for survival. The Nazis pushed us onto a truck, and we were taken to a jail where we slept on hay on the floor. And my mother stayed up all night beating off the rats that were running around in our cell. After a few days in jail, we were transported to Westerbork to face possible extermination. The purpose of Westerbork Transit Camp was to temporarily hold Jews awaiting deportation to any of the death camps in the East. Each time we were scheduled for transport to a death camp, the trains were so full that we could not board. We were told to return to our barracks and wait for the next transport. In Westerbork, conditions were substandard for adults and worse for an infant. Food was scarce, and as a result, my mother could no longer nurse the baby, making her survival even more questionable. We were housed in barracks, and I remember having to sleep on my sister's diapers in order to dry them out. And then things got dramatically worse. When after 6 months in Westerbork, my father was separated from us. My mother and her 4 children were transported to Liebenau, an internment camp in Germany. This camp held those in Europe with foreign citizenships like American, French, and British. As we left my father behind, I recall my mother saying that most likely we will never see him again. From Liebenau, we were taken to Vittel, another internment camp in France. Vittel was in the mountains and was a spa town before the war. After the fall of France in 1940, the Nazis used it as a collection point for foreign nationals, including British and North and South Americans, as well as Jews holding sealed foreign passports. Officials in the Gestapo sought throughout the war to use these prisoners in exchange for German nationals held by Allied nations. However, in April 1944, as the war turned against Germany, orders were issued to arrest and deport stateless Jews and those holding papers from countries occupied by Germany. Jews holding papers from belligerent countries were also arrested and interred in France. On April 9th, 1944, 137 Jews in Vittel were assembled and transported to Drancy, a transit camp with a similar purpose like Westerbork, and then to Auschwitz, where they were murdered. Vittel was liberated on September 9th, 1944. One of my most terrifying memories of Vittel involves a baby carriage someone had given my mother, a really old, beat-up carriage. One day, Mother suggested I take the baby for a walk. While on our walk, there was an air raid. Planes were flying and bombs were exploding. I was on a rubble-covered street and rushing to get back to my mother when the carriage tipped over and Edie rolled out. I scooped her up into my arms as fast as I could, turned the carriage around, and pulled it all the way back to where we were housed. Without a second to spare, we reached the door where they pulled us in just as they were locking the doors. I can still see that whole thing as it happened today. After almost 2 years of not seeing my father, I witnessed a miracle. At the end of a long line of people emerging from a transport to Vittel, I stared in disbelief as my father appeared at the end, helping a wounded man. When my mother saw him, she literally passed out. It was a beautiful sight when the American jeeps and tanks started rolling into the town and liberated the camp. I remember when an American soldier came over to the fence and gave me some carrots and my first piece of American white bread. I went running to my mother to show her, look what I have for Edie, because our main concern was trying to keep her alive. When Americans were liberating us, a soldier from General Patton's Third Army, Eldon Nicholas of Cadillac, Michigan, took it upon himself to entertain children at the fence with a toy puppet. This is a picture of him and his puppet that he used to entertain us. I am going to play this video that was captured by a humanitarian organization that includes the puppet show and my family. When my sister and I saw this video, we were sitting in her house in front of a computer, and a woman who came to interview us brought this video. And as we were sitting there watching this, we had no idea what to expect. My sister stood up and yelled out, "Oh my God, that's me and my mom at the fence." And that's not her. That's my mother and my sister. And that's me on the left. From Vittel, the Americans sent us to La Bourbon in France, placed us in a hotel, deloused us, because we were full of lice, and oriented us to life as free people. My mother's American citizenship was instrumental in getting us passage on the Thomas H. Barry battleship for our new lives in America. And you can see that is the actual ship. I found that online and was surprised to see that. While on board, a few of us were given a chance to meet and talk with the wounded soldiers returning home. In spite of their severe wounds, all of them put on smiles on their faces when we walked in. It made us feel so good that we could give them a little pleasure. The journey to the States took very long since the war was still going on, and the captain told us they had to avoid running into any German submarines, so they really had to take the long way around to get to the States. Upon arrival in Boston, we were greeted by the American Red Cross. We were served with the most delicious donuts and hot chocolate. They were so good, and I still have a great fondness for them. As you can tell, we were then placed on a train headed for New York City, where we had a very emotional reunion with my mother's family. It was December 24th, 1944, and the city of New York was bright with holiday lights. We had heard stories that America was paved in gold, but this was more spectacular than anything we had imagined. At first, our family was separated to live with different relatives. Later, we were reunited into our own home in Orange, New Jersey. We had some difficult adjustments to make. First, we had to learn how to speak English. My father sat us around the kitchen table and told us, "English is the spoken language in the U.S., and I don't want anything else spoken in this house from now on." We were all fluent within 6 months. I also had to learn that when a plane flew over the house, I no longer had to crawl under the bed. It took quite a while to get over that fear. And then I started school. That too was a new experience, for I never had any formal education. Although things were normal as I grew up, I realized that the war had its impact on my father. He had been very successful in Europe, but the business he had before the war did not fare well for him in the United States. It was a struggle, but somehow we managed. Just a little story for you. One of my parents' biggest concern was my sister Edie. She was so malnourished that her survival was unclear. My parents took her to several doctors, and one of them recommended they feed her bacon. Now, I don't know if you know, but my parents were Orthodox, and Orthodox Jews don't eat bacon. Even though my parents were Orthodox, they bought a plate, fork, a knife, and a pan just to make her bacon. She responded well and is still living a good life in Florida. After high school, I met and married Hanna Schrob, and that was the beginning of a very exciting life for me. He showed me the world, and that helped me to develop the self-esteem that I never had. We were blessed with 4 beautiful children, Michelle, Amy, David, and Alan. On our 10th anniversary, we had the opportunity to move overseas with 3 children to Breda, Holland, where Herb oversaw the construction of a new plastic factory being built by his boss, Joe Foster of Foster Grant. Now, I don't know if that name is familiar to you, but you probably have heard of Foster Grant sunglasses. That was a small portion of that business. Plastics was really where the money came in. It was ironic that after 25 years, I was back in Holland. My parents were very upset that we were choosing to go. And my mother called me one day, and she's crying, and she says, "Hannah, you know what it was like. Why do you want to go back?" And I said, "Mom, it's 25 years later. I think things have gone for the better." And then my uncle called my husband and said, "Herb, I'm going to make you a millionaire. Don't go to Holland." Well, we didn't listen. We went. During our stay, we discovered that about 100 Jewish people had remained in Breda after the war. Since the synagogue had been destroyed in the war, they had no place to gather or to worship, and were trying to reestablish their temple. Unfortunately, the Dutch government could not subsidize nor pay for the project. On one of our visits back to the U.S., Herb and I met with several rabbis to see if there were any foundations that might help us to rebuild the temple that was lost. When Herb's boss, Joe Foster, got word of what we were trying to do, He called Herb into his office and proceeded to tell him that he would fund all the money. There was a synagogue built, and it was called Bet Foster. This was one of the highlights of our life. It meant so much to us to help those Dutch Jews have a place to pray and keep their Jewish community together. Fortunately, we were able to attend the dedication of the Beth Foster Temple. And there's a picture there on the left, and the gentleman on the right with glasses is my husband. There were so many dignitaries from all over the country that attended this ceremony. I could go on and on telling you more and more stories, but time is limited, so I will close. Thank you all for allowing me to share my story with you today. I have lived a very full and exciting life. I have traveled to many countries and came to the realization that America is the best country in the world. And I am so proud to be an American. Before I close, I would like to tell you one more story. When I was in 5th grade, I was constantly bullied by one of the boys in my school. He often told me, "Dirty Jew, why don't you go back to where you came from?" It finally came to a head when he followed me home, knocked me to the ground, and started to beat me up. I still cringe about that. So, ladies and gentlemen, when you and your children see anybody being bullied, don't let that person continue bullying. Go and report it to some important person like a teacher. And don't let that person get away with it. Over the years, and we have recently had a very good example of bullying from the top of our country. Over the years, I have experienced anti-Semitism, but not to the extent that it is happening here in America today, and not only in America, but all over the world. It is so sad that we have to fear going to the synagogue to worship and to endure hatred and violence all over again. All of us are the future of this country, and it will be up to us to make sure that all peoples are able to live in freedom and enjoy this beautiful country. Let us do away with anti-Semitism and hatred of all people that now exist in our country. May God bless you and the United States of America. I want to thank the Holocaust Museum for keeping alive what happened during World War II and the Jewish people. It is so important to make people aware and to prevent history from repeating itself. Thank you, and thank you all.
Thank you, Hannah. If you have a question that you want answered, just raise your card. And their staff is coming around. They're coming down below as well, okay? And I'll start with some of the questions that came on from online. So, question number one, what do you think gave your mother her strength during the war to keep going and to keep the four of you safe and alive? It's a good question.
It's a very good question. And whenever you're faced with something so terrible, somehow on your inner self, you find that strength to keep on and doing what you have to do to keep everybody alive. And my mother was a good fighter. She used to go to the Gestapo and act like a crazy woman and saying, "I have a baby and she's dying and you gotta give me this and you gotta..." And they said, "Get this crazy woman out of here and give her what she wants." So she did a lot of good fighting to make sure that we all came out alive.
Do you speak any other languages besides English?
Dutch, but that's fading. They say if you don't use it, you lose it. I also understand German, a bit of French, but I like to speak English.
Did your father continue his eyeglass business once he was in the United States?
He tried. He tried very hard, but somehow it just wouldn't take off, and he had to give that thought.
What did he end up doing?
He had a dry goods business that failed, and then he went to another dry goods business, and that was not successful. So my mother, in order to help provide, which was not, it was looked down upon by European men. They don't like their women working. She got a job sewing bras and girdles for a piecework. And we were not allowed to tell my father that she was working at all. And eventually she was hired by a furniture company to do upholstering. And she was very, very good at it. And she even made curtains like this for theaters, and 2 or 3 men would have to help her push the material through the machine. So she was a big help in keeping our household going.
Interesting. Okay, what made you want to tell about your experience and share your family's story?
Well, it started quite a while ago when I lived in Virginia Beach. The Holocaust Society found out I was a Holocaust survivor and invited me to join with them. And on many, many occasions, there were about 4 of us that went into different schools, and each one of us had a different story to tell. From there, they had interviewed all the survivors in the area and made a book out of it, and it's called To Life. And my story is in that book. So one year, my family all gathered here in Plano for Thanksgiving. There were about 14 of us. And I brought the book with me. And after dinner, while we were still seated around the table, I asked my son if it would be okay for me to read that story. And I did. And there was total silence for just a few seconds. And all of a sudden, my granddaughter came over to me, put her arms around me, and cried her eyes out and said, "Grandma, I had no idea that you went through that." That's when I realized how important it is to keep this story going so that it won't happen again.
Did your parents talk about the war or their experiences with you and your siblings?
Never. They never mentioned it, not in my presence or my siblings. That was just, they wanted it out of their minds. So I learned a lot from what I remember myself and my oldest brother. We talked about it, and that's how I got a lot more details.
Okay. What was the first time you spoke with your kids about the history of the war? Was it at this gathering? Okay.
Yes.
Where did your siblings move to? Are they Texans? What happened to them?
Well, I lived in Worcester, Massachusetts, where I raised them for 27 years. And then they went off one at a time to college, but they never came home. They found jobs that didn't allow them to work in any closeness to the family.
Okay.
My 2 girls still live in Boston. My youngest lives in Pittsburgh. And David lives in Allen, Texas. So, and that's one of the reasons I came to Dallas. I've only been here 4 years, and it was a good move.
Okay. What about your siblings? Your brothers and sisters?
The only one alive is my sister.
Okay. And she's the one who's in Florida?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. How did you keep yourselves busy on the ship when you were coming to the United States?
You know, children are very resilient, and it doesn't take much for us to whip up a game and chase each other and play hide and seek, and I guess that's what we did most of the day. But my oldest brother, Bernie, he hung over the railing most of the trip.
Okay. Do you think, as you were growing up in the United States, that you had any lingering feelings or effect from what you went through during the war?
That's a hard question to answer. Yes, I still have nightmares going back to those days. I think I will always have them, and especially after speaking here or going to some movie that you see remnants of the war, that just brings it all back again. I think, and that's the way it was with all of us. We all remember how difficult it was and how fortunate we are that we came to the States, and all my children are, thank God, 4 of them are college graduates, and they all had wonderful jobs. And what more can a mother ask for?
Were you ever able to reunite with the soldier that performed the puppet show for you and your family? If not, what's something you wish you could tell him?
What joy he brought to all those children. They had never seen anything like it. My sister had traveled to D.C. and was fortunate enough to meet the son of Elton. And she's the one that gave him the pictures that you saw of his father holding the puppet.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know, was it on the... I thought I had it.
The picture, it's up.
It's up there?
Down there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, final question. What gives you hope?
At the moment, that's very hard. I'm a patriot. I love this country. But it is hurting me tremendously to see what's happening. I don't know where it's going to end, but I'm very scared that history might at some point repeat itself. And that's... I'm not so worried about myself, but I worry about my kids and my grandchildren, and I have 4 great-grandchildren. I worry what kind of a life are they going to have. And I just hope that things will turn around and get better.
Okay. Thank you. So thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We will continue this series in person and via Zoom on Thursday. And our next speaker will be Dr. Andris Lako, who will share his story of survival as a child in Budapest, Hungary, and we hope you will join us. Now, if you would like to meet Hanna, you are welcome to come up to the stage to say hello, and thank you again all for joining us.
Thank you.